It's 8:53 a.m. on Saturday morning, August 31st, 2019. And Jadeveon Clowney, pending physicals by players involved, will be a Seattle Seahawk. What the hell? How are you doing, fellas?
I think Evan's in shock.
I think I might have a heart attack.
Oh, that'd be good. It would be good podcast TV. So, as long as Alex is around to take care of you.
She's not. She's in Seattle this weekend. Can we just say John fucking Schneider for a second? I was told by so many fucking haters in this world that he was on the hot seat the past couple years. What has John Schneider done this season? What has he done? The season hasn't even started, and he's had a championship offseason. This is incredible. This is incredible. I mean, Mingo was not going to make the roster. We were talking about cutting Mingo. Trading Mingo? I mean, we're not even talking about the cap savings aspect of this. This saves the Seahawks an additional $4 million this year. Like, if you really think about it, when they're trading Martin and Mingo and the cost of the Clowney tag, the net cost for Clowney is only like $10 million. Have you thought about that? Because Mingo costs, by trading him, it saves us like $5 million.
It's insane. Add on Evan's point, John Schneider, so far this offseason, re-signed Russell Wilson, maybe the hardest task he had to do. Re-signed Bobby Wagner, made the Frank Clark trade, turned all that extra picks into all the guys they've gotten, DK Metcalf at the end of the second. And now this, the range of emotions we've all had since the Dwayne Brown stuff last night has been crazy. And I couldn't put it any easier than this. John Schneider just took Bill O'Brien, who's not a GM, who was put in a desperate position. He took him to school. Because if you look at like a comparable trade, Khalil Mack's obviously at a different level than Clowney is. But those guys got 2 first-rounders and extra picks for Mack last year at around the same time. They gave up a late third potentially, if the Seahawks are as good as we think, which they're already getting from Earl Thomas, a guy they were going to cut. And Jacob Martin's a good young player, and it sucks they have to give him up. He was a good player at a cheap price, but man, this deal is so one-sided, it is ridiculous.
Well, time for any background here for a second, guys. So there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about. And I will say that, like, in my wildest dreams, I did not expect that the Seahawks would be able to consummate a trade for Jadeveon Clowney that included a player that they were 100% going to cut today. 100%. There's no way Barkevious Mingo is going to be on this roster after today, regardless of this trade. And he's part of the deal. This really, to me, in a lot of ways, is a Jacob Martin plus a third-rounder trade. And the rest of the NFL won't see it that way. Most Texans fans are going to be like, who the hell's Jacob Martin? Most Seahawks fans will be like, who the hell's Jacob Martin? He's the most valuable part of this deal, in my opinion. I think Jacob Martin is a young pass rusher with 3 years left of contract control who has upside. And that's a meaningful give. Like, I think in some ways, Jacob Martin is a more valuable piece or potentially more valuable piece than if they had included a Jermaine Ifedi. So, Ifedi was a guy who was on a last year of his deal. The Seahawks are almost certainly not going to re-sign him next year. But, Martin was not a starter. And it was not clear how many snaps he was going to get with Clowney coming here. And as I was tweeting in the middle of the night last night, I really see the potential for Clowney to be – I just saw finalized. So I don't know if that means that the physical's passed. You guys seeing this?
From who?
Where did I just see it?
My timeline is going at like a light.
The guy from Houston that's broke it. He says finalized. So I'm opening it up on Twitter here. I'll grab the link to the tweet and put it in.
Oh my God.
That.
How did they do this?
I don't know, man.
How did they do this? This shit is like this wouldn't work in Madden.
No, they would reject that in Madden. That wouldn't even come close. So here's what happened. So Houston and Miami worked out a deal. And this was a very unique situation because Clowney wouldn't go to the Dolphins. So Bill O'Brien, who's not a GM, he's acting GM. They had an issue with the GM who they fired. He was put in a position where he had to get desperate because Clowney wasn't reporting there. Seattle emerged after that Miami thing fell through, and Schneider just feasted on the week because they had no leverage. They had nothing left. And after the Miami thing fell through, there was very limited trade partners. So not a lot of teams had the cap room or the picks. The best part about the pick thing, and we're going to get into this later, Seattle has a third-round pick coming next year from their Earl Thomas comp. So they're basically giving up nothing. Well, Jacob Martin is great, but this was a unique scenario where John Schneider just pounced on. This isn't Sheldon Richardson. I saw Ben tweet that out. They're not acting desperate. They were actually in a position of strength here.
I mean, consider that even this is a one-year rental. Let's assume they're not extending him. The compensation is absolutely reasonable.
Yeah.
Like, assuming they don't even extend him, assuming he's a one-year rental, phenomenal compensation.
Yeah, so let's play that out. Play that out for a second. Let's assume we don't know which third-round pick they're getting. Let's assume for a second it's the lower of the third-round picks, which would be the comp pick, which is the end of the third round. Comp picks are always the end of the third round. And what you're getting is a guy who, if he is a rental, very likely gets a contract next year in the open market that will be a 2021 third-round comp pick. So you're basically moving your comp pick back 1 year in the same round to get Jadeveon Clowney. So in some ways, it's a Jacob Martin and Barkevius Mingo for Clowney deal.
Yeah, they cancel out. And if you re-sign them, then this pays dividends potentially for years because you have the cap space. I don't think people realize how unique of a player Jadeveon Clowney is. Brian, you touched on this sort of in the middle of the night. This isn't Sheldon Richardson where you're kind of fitting him into a hole that he's going to have to take 8 weeks to learn. If you saw the kind of impact Khalil Mack made right away in the first game without practicing last year, probably won't be at that level, but Clowney and this defense and Ziggy Ansah is probably going to play this week. This changes everything. This completely changes the complexion of their team, especially defensively. And they didn't give up.
Get this. I'm sorry to cut you off. A fan just sent me a screenshot of the Madden trade console. The trade was declined by Madden.
I gotta retweet that out.
Oh my god. Yeah, I just tweeted it. That's wild.
This is insane. Clowney is a dominant edge player, and apparently he's in phenomenal shape.
We're going to see Poona Ford play next to Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, come on. Poona Ford, Jadeveon Clowney. In 6 weeks, Jaron Reed, Ziggy Ansah.
And they didn't give up any starting linebackers or any of their good backups.
That was so weird for a second when they're like 2 linebackers, and I'm like, what? They want Austin Calitro because they're not getting any of our starters. There's no way. And then I was like, wait a second. They run a 3-4. They don't want any of our linebackers. Our defensive ends are their linebackers. So that was confusing for Twitter for a little while. I would have guessed it would have been Mingo and Marsh. Would have been my guess. Then I would have been like, because I think
too far.
Yeah, I think they would have cut Marsh had they not kept Martin.
So Marsh probably makes the team now.
So yeah, I mean, what this does to some extent is this also really, man, Rasheem Green, he is going to get chances. He is going to get chances because Martin's not there. But holy crap, I mean, just Poona Ford and Clowney together. And what people don't get also is Clowney was a 4-3 defensive end playing in the 3-4 as a linebacker. That was not his best position. And I know Nathan and I disagreed on this and argued a little bit on the pod earlier this week. I absolutely believe that they're going to try Clowney on inside defensive tackle during pass rush and nickel situations. Like the Texans played him at middle linebacker sometimes and blitzed him so they could get him against guards. The guy is like, he is a physical freak. So you get his speed inside in pass rush situations. Man, this is big. And I don't know about you guys. I do not see this at all as a Sheldon Richardson deal. I'm not worried about this turning into something where we're going to be like, oh man, he didn't work out. It was a dumb move. We gave up way too much. What was the trade comp for Sheldon Richardson? You guys remember?
The second and
Second
curse.
pick.
It was like second and third. It was multiple picks, right? I'm going to look that up.
No, it was second and curse.
Was it second and curse?
I think so.
That was the year where Blair Walsh cost them a lot of draft position.
Yeah, Jermaine Kearse and a second round pick. So, I mean, and that was for a guy in Sheldon Richardson who never had a perfect fit with the Seahawks defense.
And here's the kicker that I just think about. They could tag Clowney next year, and if they're not going to re-sign him, why can't they trade him for what Clark got traded for? Like, they might not just get this third-round comp.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. I mean, that would be a dick move. And Clowney's kind of proven that he won't sign that tender. So, you know, but you could get something.
If you trade him to where he wants and he gets the contract he wants, I think he'd be just as happy. They have so much leverage now.
Yeah, in the years leading up to the Seahawks acquiring Sheldon Richardson, he had 1.5 sacks, 5 sacks. You know, in the years leading up to Jadeveon Clowney becoming a Seahawk, he had 9.5 sacks. I mean, he is not an elite edge rusher. He's not an elite edge rusher. He was not an elite edge rusher for the Texans. I don't know for sure if we can say that he's not going to be an elite edge rusher in this defense, right? Like, do either of you feel like give me a percentage chance that you think Jadeveon Clowney is going to be a better player in Seattle than he was in Houston?
100% chance.
I'm at like 75% chance that he's going to be better.
No, J.J. Watt.
What did you say, Jeff?
I said he had J.J. Watt there, but yeah, I think Pete with him, Pete must be going crazy right now.
He's quintessential Pete material, right? I mean, freak athlete, some questions about motivation, you know.
Now,
name a player on the Seahawks that doesn't play their hearts out. I mean, that has a reputation for taking plays off. I mean, that doesn't happen with Pete.
Well, the cool thing is, like, Dwayne Brown knows this guy. I'm sure he vouched for him. I think Brock said a few years ago, they're super tight. Dwayne Brown's probably loved how his career has just remarkably changed from coming to this program. Clowney in this defense is crazy. Their defense was like a massive red flag a few months ago. Now has a potentially dominant front seven. Their secondary, we'll save that for another day. That's still the big hole in this team. But to get this guy and not have to give up one starting offensive lineman, because that was scaring me about this whole trade. I hated the idea of trading Justin Britt. I thought they were going to have to trade him or Fetty, which I would have been willing to accept because they have Jamarco Jones and they have Fant. But do that and not give up an offensive lineman or a starter in general and not give up a second-round pick, which we all seemed okay with probably 2 days ago. I can't get over this trade. It's insane.
So let's fast forward to week 6 for a second. If it is Clowney, Ford, Reed, Ansah, Kendricks, Wagner, and Wright, who are the other teams in the NFL that are in the conversation for best front seven? Like Eagles, maybe? Do you guys know? I mean, I'm trying to think of I don't want to be a complete homer, but I mean, who else?
The Bears are pretty good.
The Bears.
Hakeem Hicks, Mack, Roquan Smith. They don't have 7 guys like that. The Bears are the only ones that can probably on paper compete.
Yeah, so Hakeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Bilal Nichols. I don't know him. Khalil Mack. Yeah. Roquan Smith, Danny Trevathan, Leonard Floyd. Yeah.
And they still have BBK, Calitro, and Barden backing those guys up. Like, this team. And Collier's going to come back.
Yeah, you got Collier. I mean, you've got Marsh, who I know people are like, whatever. I mean, he is a guy that has had, 7 sacks in the league before. What did he have? What did he have last year? Cassius Marsh. Marsh was 5.5 sacks last year. So, you know what? I mean, screw all of the analysis for a second. Jadeveon Clowney is one of the most amazing athletes to ever enter the NFL, and he's a Seahawk. I just want to see him suit up. I mean, even if he's a 1-year rental, it is very tempting to go out and get a Jadeveon Clowney jersey, right? I mean, how good is that going to look? You guys are both looking at you're looking at the new. Evan is basically catching flies with his mouth over there. It's just like jaws dropped to the ground.
I in a way, I don't think this is real life. Like, I think I'm going to wake up in about 30 minutes on a nice, peaceful Saturday morning to watch some fun college football, but this doesn't feel real.
No,
this does not feel real.
Well, and it's funny, right? Like, we've all been in different places on this move at different times. I mean, during the offseason, Evan, you were like pounding the table for finding a way to get Clowney, right? And we were like, yeah, that would be a good move. They franchised him. It didn't look like it was going to happen. Then, I think all of us were in the camp of, no, that's a dumb move. They're not that close to a Super Bowl. You don't go all in for a trade like this. I mean, that was even a few weeks ago we were saying that on the pod. And then
the concern was the price.
Exactly.
The price was, it's going to be a first or a second round pick and maybe even Ifedi or something like that. Like, the Texans offered a first and Clowney for Tunsil. Like, they're insane. They're insane. John Schneider did dirty things to them. This is not legal. Like, somebody needs to contact the Seattle Police Department. This is not appropriate. It's not okay. This is not okay. I actually feel guilt. I feel guilt inside of me. For the first time, we boned somebody so hard that I feel guilt right now. I literally feel guilt right now after this trade.
Well, thank God, John Schneider. John Schneider, be careful if he ever goes to Houston. It's an open carry state, isn't it? Right? So, Texas is. So, I don't know if it's safe walking the streets of Houston.
I love the Texans. They gave us a left tackle for when we had nothing, Reese Odiombo there. And now we just turned Cassius Marsh starting into Jadeveon Clowney. We got to call the Texans more. Let's get Watt. Let's get Hopkins.
Holy crap.
Is he going to be able to play?
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, I mean, he's just a freak athlete. I think that there aren't a lot of nuances in his game. I would say that it is very likely that he will suit up for the first game. I would say 90 to 95% chance that he will play in the first game. I do not know if he will start, and I definitely do not expect him to play a full slate of snaps. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he is at 30 snaps in the first game, and they're all just pass rush rotational pieces. He and Ansah could split time at Leo to start. But it's weird. Pro Football Focus had him at a right end, and all the tape I've watched of him, he's rushing from the left. So my expectation is he'll be on the left and Ansah will be on the right when they're in pass rush situations. But I certainly expect him to play in the first week. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I totally agree. Sounds like, I think Rappaport said it, that he had a phenomenal word. Probably came from whoever's representation is right now. but it sounded like he had a phenomenal workout. He's in shape. Khalil Mack was, again, I keep bringing him up. He got traded, I think, around the same time. I think it was the Friday or Saturday before the season, and he came out after not working out or not practicing all summer with Oakland and destroyed Aaron Rodgers in the first game. I don't know if he'll do that, but you can easily come up with a 25 to 30 snap plan. Cincinnati's got a bad offensive line. Their first-round pick tore his ACL or something, Jonah Williams. So their other guy is hurt. So this is what a game to transition. I don't know how you manage him and Ansa there. They have to kind of both be eased in, but yeah, Quentin Jefferson can play the rundowns. Marsh can play a little on pass downs. Rasheem Green can play a bit. You can really come up with a good plan for him. This is the perfect week for it.
I love the chat. The chat is just going crazy. Everyone is so freaking hyped for this.
Bill Simmons just tweeted something really funny. He was like, if this ridiculously one-sided trade happened in my fantasy league, we would have had a 1,000 email thread of finger-pointing protests and insults.
Oh, man. I mean, imagine being a Texans fan right now. They are, like, at least we know that Jacob Martin is good. Like, he's a good
I mean, even that's like,
I know, but at least we know that there's some value there. If you're a Texans fan, you know nothing. You think he's like a total worthless chip.
But Jacob Martin is a could be good type of player. He's not like he's going to be good type of player.
Totally, but I'm just saying we at least place some value on him. Whatever value we have is 10 times whatever value a Texan fan has for Jacob Martin. So they're basically feeling like we gave up a generational physical talent for two total like scrubs with no talent and a third-round pick next year.
Didn't even get an offensive lineman.
Yeah, I mean, if they had think about it. If they had not franchised Jadeveon Clowney, what kind of deal would he have gotten this offseason?
Similar to Clark, probably better.
And they would have gotten a third-round pick next year for that. So basically they kept him, and what they got out of it was Jacob Martin and Barkevious Mingo. That's what they got for franchising Jadeveon Clowney.
And that's where you see how good John Schneider is and what happens when a team makes their coach the GM. The guy got schooled, and he played it all wrong, and he let Jadeveon control the leverage and not the team.
Well, and you know what? Screw the Texans and their Jeremy Lane, rejected the physical. Take it, eat it. Like this is more than adequate payback for that move. So, holy crap! What do you do? What do you do?
Hold up, I'm sorry. Can we go back to one thing? So obviously we were talking about Justin Britt and Ifedi both being involved in the trade talks. What does the trade look like if those two defensive players aren't involved? You know what I mean? Because that seems like a massive shift in value swing. Like, would it have been Ifedi or Britt, like straight up 1-to-1? Or like, what does that trade look like?
I don't know. I do want to pause it a second and say thank you to Black Knight and to TexAge Texans for donating in the super chat. As everyone knows, we donate all of our proceeds here at Hawk Blogger to charity, and we have costs of our own for running the show. So we really, really appreciate folks chipping in as we start building out the show, and it's going to be an amazing season. So it is the time to get in. If you haven't already, sign up at patreon.com, patreon.com/hawkblogger. Now is the time. It is going to be lit this season. So back to your question, Evan. What would it have been if we got there's a question that came with one of the super chat. Never heard these really. Never mind. So what would we have gotten, or what would they have gotten if it was Britt or Ifedi, or Britt and Ifedi? I mean, I don't think Britt and Ifedi was ever a deal.
Either scenario, what does that trade look like? Is it a 1-to-1 trade and no draft capital? Considering the compensation was so low?
I would have to think it's something like that. Like I would have had to have thought that it was a fifth or maybe a sixth round pick. And maybe that's what the Texans valued more, is getting a higher pick as part of the deal. But yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. Jeff, you have a point of view?
I think the pick would have had to be even lower, because I just think, I was tweeting it this morning. Fetty, you could have made it work maybe instead of the two edge rushers, because he's in the last year of his deal, similar to Clowney. They didn't give him the fifth-year option. They're pretty clear in their position on him. They have depth there. Fans, DeMarco Jones, both coming off injury. I'm not crazy about Britt as a player, but I think I was on it. There's no way they should trade him. I would have been very upset if they traded him. I don't even love Britt again. And he's a guy they should probably look at trading next offseason. But right now, Ethan Posick has to play left guard because Patty is hurt. Haynes is hurt. Simmons is hurt. So he has to play left guard maybe the first couple of weeks. Joey Hunt, who's usually the backup center, he has an ankle sprain. So you're left with Marcus Martin and Roos. And if you have to take one of those or two of those guys and make them starters, that takes away from one of the team's true positions of strength. And I thought that would have been a big mistake. And to come out of there with none of them and keep that price is still crazy. But yeah, maybe you see a lower pick. I don't know. I don't know how much lower you could have got. A fourth and Britt, maybe that would have done it, but I'd much rather do this.
Well, and I would guess that Penny was part of this at some point. I think the LaShawn McCoy news out of Buffalo might have had an impact on that part of the deal. It's all conjecture because, man, we were all off. Everybody was off about what they were going to get in terms of trade comp. But they need a running back, and we've got him. And as of now, it's looking like Rashad Penny and CJ Prosise will be Seahawks today. And we'll find out later today for sure. But LaShawn McCoy getting cut, that was surprising. And you'd have to think the Texans are going to want to get him. Poor LaShawn McCoy. Can you imagine going and running behind that Texans offensive line? I mean, that is not going to be a good thing. So John Schneider, your boy, Evan, has made a trade every year before cut down. Every year. There's been Justin Coleman. There's been, Sheldon Richardson. There's been all. And he's got a perfect record, man. He did it again. And he might not be done. Do any of you think that he's not done?
I definitely would. He needs to go look at nickel corners. And maybe a 6 wide receiver.
Yeah, I think corners. I think I think corners for
hot seat my ass. This is the GOAT right here.
He's not executive of the year this year.
Well, this is the type of move that could get him that even if the Seahawks aren't good, like they like people like flashy moves, and especially moves that make other people look stupid. Yeah, so
you went through all those moves. Even if you didn't make this move, now it's crazy. You got Russell Wilson done. You got Bobby Wagner done. You got that Clark trade. They've been that draft where you've gone through that draft tree so many times. And we need to get that campaign ready.
Well, what did we say about this offseason? Remember? We were like, I gave it an A-. The only thing that was keeping it from being an A+ is I wanted them to sign another defensive lineman. I wanted them to get either Ndamukong Suh or Gerald McCoy. I thought a defensive tackle would have been great to add. But they got Clowney. That is far superior to what I thought they'd be able to get. And now there is no way you can look at this offseason from where they were to where they are now and not give John Schneider an A+. I mean, look at the draft class, guys. Look at the draft class. Can we go through that for a second? I mean, I'm going to pull it up so we can go through it one by one.
But just even in terms of asset evaluation, you traded Clark, who's probably a similar player as Clowney, for a 1 and a 3, and then acquired Clowney for half the price. Like, as a GM, that's as good. Who Clark would have been on a 1-year deal anyway. In terms of asset valuation and replacing and got Ansah in that too.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's been better work than that in a long time.
You basically traded Frank Clark for the cap room to sign Ziggy Ansah.
Yeah.
LJ Collier, a first-round pick, And you still have the second round pick next year that you got for Clark. And now you've traded for freaking Jadeveon Clowney.
So half the price of Clark.
Why did we trade Clark and then we get Clowney? That makes no sense. We are so much better than we were when we had Frank Clark.
Don't even forget, we have a first-round pick in LJ Collier, who we haven't seen shit from, could end up being a day one contributor.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. I mean, you had the trade. You got LJ Collier, Marquise Blair, who looks like he's going to be a good one. DK Metcalf, who looks like he's going to be potentially a great one. Cody Barton looks good. Phil Haynes, who we haven't seen, but all reports are that guy looks like a starter waiting to happen. Amadi could very well end up being a starter. Ben Burke-Irvin, who looks like he's probably going to make the squad. Travis Homer looks like a practice squad guy, and John Ursua. That alone is an amazing offseason. So I mean, this is insane. Evan, I know you got to run in a little bit. Jeff, what's your?
I'm good for a bit. This is.
All right, guys, I gotta run. I appreciate it, but I cannot believe this is. I cannot believe this is real life. The Seahawks traded for Jadeveon Clowney, and he's only going to cost us $11 to $12 million this year because we traded Mingo, who was also going to be cut, and Jacob Martin, not even sure he's that good. Go Seahawks.
Thanks, Evan. And hey, thanks, Lisa LaFranco, for donating in the super chat. Super appreciate it.
And we're still on for tonight, right?
We're still on. 5 o'clock tonight. We're going to be back on to talk about cuts and final roster. So we should know by then. And there might be more trades, folks. So please tune back in at 5. There'll be plenty going on then. We'll open it up for questions on the chat, especially on the YouTube chat. So if people have questions, start asking them. Jeff, where do you think this puts the Seahawks in terms of what their ceiling is? What is this team now that they have Clowney?
Oh, they went from being probably a wild card team to a potential team that can get a bye, I think. If the team, there's one area of this team that's still probably two areas that they're not great at right now. The secondary is still a big problem. Free safety, we're not sure how good the corners are. That could be a thing that hinders them all year, but they kept the offensive line intact. The running game is good, and they kept Penny. We're both not crazy about Penny. I would have been happy to toss him aside, but they have the running back depth. They have one of the best front sevens in the NFL, probably on paper the second best or first best. So the biggest thing they have is just disrupting these quarterbacks they're going to play against this year. Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo. They got some tough matchups early. They got Breeze, Ben Roethlisberger, Kyler. But I think they go potentially from a 10 to a 12-win team. I think that's if he hits and he's that kind of player. I think the Bears. I keep bringing up Khalil Mack, but I think when you get a guy like this, it takes you from a good to a potentially great team. They got an elite player for nothing.
Yeah, there's so the naysayers, and there will definitely come out. They will come out, right? You'll get some folks from analytics Twitter saying pass rush is not that valuable. There's new analytics that have come out saying that coverage is the thing that's valuable. Pass rush is not. It's not as predictable or consistent season. You'll hear things like that. You'll hear that Jadeveon Clowney is not an elite pass rusher, that he's only okay or better than average, and that really he's an elite run defender. And run defense is not that valuable. So how valuable is he? Those are going to be the things you're going to hear from naysayers. Look, I think that things that they're missing is, one, I think Clowney, the player that was in Houston, is not going to be the same player that we have in Seattle. I think both from a scheme fit, from a motivation fit, from the players playing next to him in this case. I mean, he was not next to J.J. Watt. They were on opposite sides of the field as far as I remember. I might be wrong. Do you know?
You're right.
So, I mean, I think that, and then coaching. I mean, I think Pete Carroll I give him a ton of credit. So I think you're going to get a better Jadeveon Clowney, and he might turn out to be an elite pass rusher as well. I think that this guy, he was the 7th ranked edge defender overall by PFF last year. He was like a near elite, 89.5, 90 is elite blue chipper. This guy could legitimately be an all pro. He could be an all pro for this, like one of the 4 best defensive ends in the NFL this year. That's that's not just crazy. I'm excited on a Saturday because I made this trade. That is absolutely a legitimate possibility. And so if you were to say, and Ansah is really the big question mark. If he stays healthy, Ansah was the number one pass rusher by pass rush productivity in the NFL last year, according to Pro Football Focus. That's amount of pressures created per snap that there is rushing the passer. So if you have him healthy and you have Clowney healthy, you have to wait for getting Jaron Reed back, and that sucks. But I think Al Woods, people are sleeping on him. I think he's a good player. I think he was a really good player, near Pro Bowler for the Colts just 2 years ago. So you put him in the middle. Poona Ford, I think we all believe that he has all-pro potential breakout at some point. Whether he's going to have the stats to be an all-pro is different. But it is not totally out of the realm of possibilities that you have 4 Pro Bowl level defensive linemen when Reed comes back. Like, that by itself is super exciting. And then you've got what is one of the top 2 to 3 linebacking cores in the NFL. Michael Kendricks, who looks like his career, like he's playing for his football life right now, and he knows it. He's playing like it. You got Bobby Wagner, you got KG Wright, and you've got some guys behind him that can even fill in if KJ gets hurt. I mean, this defense goes from being what I think is likely to be in the middle of the pack. They were 15th last year. I think they're about similar this year. I think they could easily be a top 10 defense this year, easily.
And I think you hit on a really good point there. And I remember when I woke up this morning and saw your string of tweets. I thought you made a really good point about Ansah. And Ansah was a guy who we were really excited about when they signed him. I think we did an emergency pod. That was a huge part of the Clark trade. This really negates his risk. And there was big risk with him based on durability. He had that shoulder. Some people were talking he was going to miss 6 to 8 games. Pete kept saying he was going to be back week 1. And he's back week 1. And now the risk of him from just having Clowney number 1, you can ease him in a little bit. You're not completely reliant on Ansah. If Ansah hits as well as Clowney, just think about the impact Michael Bennett had. And Michael Bennett was such a good player. Averill and Bennett, those guys completely changed what made a good defense great. These two guys athletically are at completely different levels than both Bennett and Averill. We're not saying they'll be as productive, but these two guys, if Michael Bennett could be that kind of player in this defense, if you have Clowney and Ansah and they both hit, and you're not totally reliant on Ansah now, it's just a bonus, plus Collier, plus Rasheem Green, plus all these guys. Yeah, this makes what looked like a bottom 10 defense probably a couple of weeks ago when Ansah looked uncertain and Collier got hurt and their secondary wasn't getting better. This could be close to a top 10 unit. And that really was the one thing that held this team back. Obviously, we can talk about the other issues later, but this just changed the complete complexion of the team. And I said earlier, they're now potentially a team that could be a top seed in the conference. They have Russell Wilson and a potentially dominant defense with a good O-line.
So I wrote, and someone asked, I looked this up. Someone asked a question in the chat. Let me find out who it was. Give him props for it. This is coming from Mark Baker. And he asks, what do we feel about the secondary? And does this change anything? Did you hear me, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Something come through?
Yeah, I just saw that Houston and Miami were close. They were going to give a first-round pick and Clowney to get Tunsil. And the fact that they had to turn back and get this, it's still – my head had to process that for a second.
Yeah, they they were highly leveraged here, and that's what happens when you mishandle your roster. I mean, I think the Seahawks deserve similar criticism for how they handled Earl.
Yeah.
It's not just the Texans. The Seahawks blew it with Earl.
Oh, there was a stretch of a couple of years where they just made mistake after mistake. The Sheldon Richardson, Malik McDowell situation, and they got desperate. It was the same thing. I think the Sheldon Richardson, which you're going to see people compare, I saw it this morning. I think the Sheldon Richardson scenario is exactly what the Texans did. They had a unique thing blow up in their face, which they kind of led to, like we led to by picking Malik McDowell. And they got desperate, and at the last second, they made a move that they felt it was their only opportunity. And if you see people compare Sheldon Richardson to Clowney, just ignore it. It's so different. This was an opportunity that John Schneider pounced on. This was not them acting out of desperation because they needed pass rushers. They could have easily got by with what they had, probably been okay. They would have been fine. Their linebackers are that good, and their offense could be that good, but this is just a unique opportunity, and Clowney wanted to come to Seattle. That came out like last week, I think. So if you just keep looking at what they are in the field now, they're just remarkably. They went from having a situational pass rusher, essentially, and a guy they were going to cut to an all-pro level player. Those deals just don't happen very often.
Yeah, I'm going to see if this works. See how much it shows here. But are you able to see this, Jeff?
Yep.
So this was the Seahawks defense last year, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, but in neutral script situations, their run defense. So this is neutral script for folks that don't know. It's first, second, third quarter. It's first, second down when you really, and the score is within, 8 points. So you know that there's the team's not going desperately to try to run or run the clock or go for big plays. So this, you get your best view of how the team plays in those situations. This is kind of your core. And the Seahawks run defense was really, really bad last year. They gave up over 5 yards a carry. They ranked 26th in the NFL in neutral script run defense last year. Then if you look at their explosive rushes that they surrendered per pass attempt or per rush attempt, they were, one of the best in the NFL a few years ago. More than 1 out of every 10 run against the Seahawks last year went for more than 12 yards. Like, that is insane. The percentage of explosive rushes that they gave up was insane. And so the reason I'm sharing that is you just added what is generally believed to be, if not the best, the second best edge run defender in the NFL. You've added Poona Ford, who very likely could be one of the top handful of interior run defenders in the NFL. You've added Michael Kendricks, and you've got KJ Wright back, and you've got Al Woods, who is an excellent run defender. This could end up being one of the best run defensive units in the NFL. Now, analytics Twitter is going to hate that, and they're going to laugh and poke fun, and that's fine. But I'll tell you what is always true. It is better to be great at something than it is to be terrible at it. I don't care how relatively important it is. I would rather the Seahawks give up no yards on a play than give up 12 yards on a play. And that does not take a rocket science to figure that out.
Yeah. And then their pass rushing unit looks good. So that sets them up even a step further. Because now you're putting their team and Clowney in CenturyLink. We haven't really talked about that yet. We've seen what pass rushers do on that field where you can get that speed. If you remember that game, that Seattle-Houston game a couple of years ago before Dwayne Brown got traded, Clowney just ate them for lunch. Reese Odiombo started left tackle. Obviously, he's going to be playing better left tackles than that. But if you want to watch a fun Clowney game, put on film of that. Because he just disrupted so much of what they wanted to do. He was in the backfield within seconds. Him on that field is a very scary with the crowd behind him. That's another thing just people aren't thinking about. He's a perfect fit for what they do defensively, schematically.
That's very true. That's very true.
Yeah. We've seen Cliff Averill talked about it so much. Him coming to CenturyLink completely changed his career.
Well, so there is one thing that people should know about Clowney that they might not know. I believe, and I'll have to look it up, I'll double check in a second. I believe he was second in the NFL in penalties last year. So you all remember Michael Bennett, right? And you remember how awesome, we have all fond memories of having him on the team. He's a fantastic pass rusher, super disruptive force on the inside and on the outside. What did he also do? The dude jumped off sides all the time, and he did it at the most frustrating times. So I believe Clowney is another one of those type of players. I'm going to check here in a second to be sure because I have this secondhand. But folks should be ready. He may be a guy that jumps off sides a time or two.
Yeah, Michael Bennett. I talked about him before. He was a dominant run player. He was a guy who got into the backfield quickly. They're not the same style player, but just think about the impact he made. Yeah, it came with its downside. There was a lot of things that the offside thing was a great call. That's something that always drove me a little nuts about him. But all the upside, all the good things you got, if you think about that kind of impact, I think that's the kind of player we're getting here. And more, younger version of that, athletically, completely different, and a guy who's hungry. He wants to get paid. And there's nowhere better to get paid than having a dominant season on a new team.
All right, I'm looking it up on NFL penalties. Okay.
Yeah, I want to know the exact number.
So they have him as an outside linebacker because he's in a 3-4, but he had more penalties than any other outside linebacker. So he had 13 penalties last year in 17 games. So I guess they're counting the playoff game. Von Miller had 7, was the next. So he had 6 more penalties, almost twice the amount of penalties as the next guy. Averaged almost a penalty a game. And let's see. I want to see how many were for offsides. Penalty counts. Yes, he had 5 offsides, 3 neutral zone infractions. So those are the same. 8 of his penalties were jumping. 2 roughing the passer, 1 encroachment, so make it 9. 1 defensive holding and 1 taunting. I can handle a little taunting. That's okay. But really, you've got 9 basically jumping the snap penalties just last year. I'm going to look back and see if I can see 2000, see older years.
Yeah.
But let's hold on a second. So I'll look at 2017. 2017, he had 5. He had 10 neutral zone infractions.
used to this.
2016, he had 4. So
everything I said about him being excited to play in Seattle, that might backfire.
Well, I don't know if backfire is the right word, right? But like, it's interesting that his sack numbers went up once his offside penalties went up, because he was 2016. He was 4 neutral zone penalties, but that was also the year that he had. If I look back, I'm pretty sure it was 2 years ago that his sack number started to jump up. So let me pull that up. Yeah, so he went from 6 sacks in 2016 to 9.5 and then 9. So I'm okay with a guy looking to jump the snap count if he's going to be productive as a pass rusher. Like that just comes with maybe that just comes with the territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Whew.
Yeah. Still. And it seems to be the consensus. We're not just being homers or something. Yeah, there's going to be guys who are going to rip the deal. I know Zach Whitman and Ben were guys who were very skeptical about acquiring Clowney. But if you look around Twitter right now, it seems pretty unanimous. Like they're saying either Houston got killed or Seattle pulled off a heist. And if you don't have that opinion, I'm open to discussing why. But I think sometimes you got to call a spade a spade. And Seattle pulled off a deal that just, if you would have talked to us 3 hours ago, someone would have presented this, as you saw with that Madden example, we would have probably laughed at that. I was thinking,
it's weird. I mean, do you think it's more likely? Well, let me start with this. It's the part that's weird is it just seems odd that the Texans would want defensive players. And it seems odd that they want defensive players that are not clearly going to step in and be huge contributors right away. So do you assume that they were going after the offensive linemen, and end of the day, do you think that the Seahawks wouldn't give them up? Do you think that the Seahawks wouldn't give up the high enough draft capital with those linemen? What's your gut on how that played out?
That's probably my gut because it seemed like Seattle and them had been talking. We had heard like rumors of it from John Clayton and Brock Heward, and I'm guessing that's where like the earlier parts of the negotiation were. And then things kind of just went on hold, and it seemed like Clowney was going to sit out. Maybe they revisit in mid-season, but I'm guessing once just it came time for desperation, maybe Seattle countered again, or maybe Houston just got desperate and more willing to just take anything. I'm sure their scouts were probably high on Jacob Martin. I'm sure they saw the same things we saw, where he is an ascending player, very good contract, control, and maybe they just were willing to bite the bullet and take that. I don't know why they took Mingo. They could have probably waited a day, picked them up for half the price. To take Mingo at 4.20, and we don't have it just helps Seattle with the roster construction now. They don't have to cut Mingo. I just can't imagine the energy through the building right now. Like that building, you've been there. The VMAC is usually crazy energy right now.
Yep.
Probably going nuts. Clowney's in the building right now taking the physical. And I just can't imagine how jacked up this team is right now. Like Russell already tweeted about it. I've seen a couple other players. Like, yeah, I don't know. As you said before, I don't know what caused the shift from Houston. It seems like it was desperation, or maybe Jacob Martin was a late throw into the deal once the offensive line thing. I'm guessing Seattle was resistant to trade linemen. Maybe not a Fetty. I'm guessing the Texans really wanted Britt. All the Texans writers this morning kept talking about how they have an issue at center. Nick Martin, a guy they drafted a few years back for Notre Dame, Zach Martin's younger brother. He's been bad for them. And Britt made a lot of sense. But normally I'd be okay with trading Britt. Britt's a good player, not a great player. It's paid like a great player. Oh, my God. Here we go.
Nathan.
We need some reason here.
He's trying to get hooked up. He'll give him a second. But yeah, I think the Brit thing would have been surprising for sure.
That would have been a bit of a gut punch because I'm not crazy about Brit as a player. We've talked about trading him so many times, and you mentioned Posick as a center is probably similar, if not better than him. But they're so beaten up right now between Simmons, Haynes hasn't even practiced yet. He's going to go on PUP, and then Ayupati's history and Fluker's history. To take away from that would have been hard, but the fact that they were able to resist and give up, I don't even know. I don't know how they pulled off that deal. But Nathan, we need to hear some reason here. We're all through the moon right now. Evan was wearing a Schneider t-shirt.
Evan actually was here and he spontaneously combust. So there is no more Evan, just so you know. Say farewell.
Worth it. I mean, it's a good one to go out on. No, I mean, it seems like a great trade. So is it official that it's a third-round pick, Mingo and Martin?
That is official. We're waiting on the finalization of the physicals, but otherwise it's a done deal.
And so this has to be their original third round, right? Because they don't actually technically have the third round that they'll get for Earl, that we expect them to get for Earl, right?
Yeah, you're right. They don't technically. Yeah, that has to be. The comp picks don't get awarded until I think the offseason.
Yeah, and that's right. So, that's meaningful because, those comp picks tend to be later, but if they go on to win the Super Bowl and Clowney helps them do that, then that gap's small. I mean, not a big thing there, but it is something. No, I mean, we talked about this. Did we do a podcast yesterday or the day before? The other blurring for me. But I was happy. I would have been comfortable with a second round pick. And so this seems like less than that. I can't believe that Mingo had any value in this deal. I think we all thought he was going to get cut. Martin's a bummer, but I would spend a third round pick to go from Jacob Martin to Jadeveon Clowney. That sounds plenty fair. For me, it's just a question of, is this really the guy that you want to give a huge long-term contract to? And we'll see whether they decide to do that or not. I really hope that they did this trade feeling very certain that's where they're going to go with this. The trade itself is pretty fantastic. I don't think I could have hoped for much better.
Aiden O'Keefe on the chat just made a funny comment. I think now that Clowney's going to sign his tender and report, the Seahawks could flip him to Miami for Laramie Tunsil. That'd be such a dick move to like have Clowney say he wants to go to the Seahawks for Seattle to get him, and then Seattle to flip him to some other team he has no control over.
That'd be amazing. Because like, who knows what like Miami was offering? Like, who knows? Wow. That would you'd probably burn a lot of bridges doing that, but boy.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's really, I think one of the fascinating parts of this, I really don't think that's going to happen. John Schneider is almost too much a man of his word. I mean, there's been times we've heard as recently as last year that the Patriots offered more for Michael Bennett than the Eagles did, and Schneider had already agreed to the deal, and so he didn't renege on it. You know, he tries to be an honorable guy, I think. So no, I don't think that's going to happen. I do think that, you know, it's really interesting to see how Clowney forced this move, right? Was franchised, did not sign the tender. If he had not been willing to miss game checks, if that part hadn't come out, then he would probably be a Dolphin. Because absolutely that is where the Texans wanted him to go. That's they had the players that the Texans wanted. And because Clowney was willing to miss game checks, just like Dwayne Brown was willing to miss game checks, ultimately Clowney got to determine where he played. It's almost like free agency.
Yeah, I think NFL players are starting to take notice of what's happening in the NBA, and they're seeing the power. It'll never get to that level, obviously, just because of the guaranteed contracts. But I think you have to be willing to give something up, and you saw with Le'Veon to an extent last year. I think he went a little too far, but yeah, I think that's a good point. He really did that. If he signs that tender, there's no way this happens. He's in Miami right now, and there's no way Houston gets as desperate as they did because they seemed happy to get that left tackle for Deshaun Watson. So without him refusing to go to Miami, which Brian, you brought up a point, was pretty rare for an NFL player. Players love Miami.
Yeah, I mean it says a ton about him, man. It does. He would have been paid a boatload by the Dolphins. There's no doubt about it. They were ready to sign him. I mean, I don't think it made any sense for the Dolphins to be making any deal for Clowney, but they would have paid him a bunch. Every pro sports player seems to love the Miami lifestyle. I am not positive. I'm pretty sure they don't have they have a favorable tax situation down there as well in terms of state income tax and that kind of stuff. But he wanted to play for contenders, and he was like, he even went to Miami, and still it was like they wined and dined him, and he was like, "You guys suck. I don't want to play for you. I want to play for a team that can win." And it also says something that he thinks Seattle's a team that can win. Like, for all the hand wringing that happens around the Seahawks and around the fans and how good is this team, Clowney wanted to play here. For all the hand wringing that goes on around Pete Carroll and whether he's good or not, he wanted to play here. He wanted to play here because I can almost guarantee you that Dwayne Brown and other guys were in his ear saying this is a good place to play. So I think there's a lot of subtext to this deal beyond just the highlight of just getting him. That's super interesting.
I have no idea what to make of some of that. Like, who knows what's going on? That could certainly be true, but I don't know. I think that's reading a lot into it. That's a lot of subtext.
Well, I mean, unless the reports are not true that he went to Miami and chose not to go there, you know, at least that seems pretty solid, right?
Yeah, that's all true. Like, he definitely did choose Seattle over Miami, it seems like.
And it seems pretty logical that the reason he'd choose them is not because, you know, he likes the state of Washington or Seattle as a city, but probably because of football. I mean, that was what reported, and I think it does make sense. But in any event, I think it does say a lot. Nathan, what is your expectation? You this earlier this week said you kind of expected, you had some expectations of how they'd use Clowney. One, how do you think they're going to use Clowney? Two, we talked about it earlier. Do you think he plays this week?
That's an interesting question. I bet he does. It's not. I mean, At least situationally, I would think so, that they'll find a way to get him on the field a little bit just to do something. And so, yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about that because he hasn't been practicing or anything, right? So, I mean, I think that they can probably do just about whatever they want with him. Like he's, I would think that the best role for him is maybe more of the Clemens or kind of Averill role. But I think that just watching him and like looking at the PFF grades and kind of learning more about him and paying a little bit more attention since the trade talk has started, I think it maybe just kind of fundamentally misunderstood who Clowney is. And so he may really be more of that Bennett type. We talked about his ability to move inside. I don't know that he'll have that. Matty Brown was talking about on Twitter using him as an interior rusher, but kind of standing him up and lining him up over gaps and using him that way. That's interesting. So you may see him get some interior rush that way. But I think looking at him as kind of a Bennett replacement is kind of, that's what I would guess at this point. It's going to be really interesting because he's such a unique player. I think I don't know. He had such a disappointing senior year in college that I don't know. I mean, he still went first overall, so he's got the pedigree and all that. He's just a fascinating player. I mean, he's athletic. He's apparently a great run stopper. He maybe isn't an elite pass rusher, but he's still a very good one. I don't think that there's really a limit to what Pete will try to do with him.
Yeah. Have you guys, Jeff, have you seen his high school highlights as a running back?
Although they're crazy.
Holy crap. I mean, that is, for anyone that's listening, if you haven't already, look up on YouTube, Jadeveon Clowney, running back, high school highlights. And I mean, the guy is a freak. He is unlike, I think there's almost no other defensive lineman in the NFL that are like him. I mean, there's a reason. This is the #1 overall pick that the Seahawks acquired for Jacob Martin and Barkevious Mingo. So, like, that is nuts. So I think you're absolutely right, Nathan. And one of the things I heard earlier this week, Hugh Millen, who I know some people don't love, but I think he does really good work. And he watched Clowney tape, and one of the things he noted is they stood him up as an inside linebacker on a number of plays. And every time they did that, it was to blitz and to match him up on guards to be able to play against them. So, yeah, I think you're spot on. That's part of what I've been thinking, is that he is a Bennett replacement and maybe the closest thing you'll get. And he might be better. Like, there's a chance. It's not for sure. I mean, no doubt about it. Bennett is amazing. But there's at least a chance. I mean, he's a better athlete than Michael Bennett. There's no doubt about that. And we don't know what he's going to look like in this defense. So there's a chance that he can be his equal. There's a chance he could even be better. We'll find out.
I mean, sky's the limits for this guy. Like, yeah, first overall pick. He's fantastically athletic. Like, yeah, I'm not going to bet that he's going to be better than Michael Bennett. Is it out of the question? Like, no, it's not out of the question, right? Do we want to talk about, like, just for a minute, the risk involved here at all?
Yeah, do it. You got to put your Nathan hat on. Come on.
I do, because I've got a million people in my mentions that are, one, mad at me because a third-round pick is not nothing, right? It is a good deal when you're trading for Jadeveon Clowney, but it is still a valuable thing. And so if he goes on to just walk after this year, that would not be good. It's not like they gave up nothing. They gave up an interesting player in Martin, and they gave up a third-round pick, right? Two things that seem to pale in comparison to the value of Jadeveon Clowney, but are valuable things. The other thing is, I don't know how many times we have to hammer this. Third-round picks are not guaranteed. Yes, Seattle has a lot of control over third-round comp picks. Yes. Are not guaranteed. Yes, Seattle has a lot of control over whether they actually get their comp picks or not, or whether they, throw them away on Ed Dixon and Jerome Brown. But for starters, he could have an injury. He could have an injury, and he could not get a contract worth a third-round pick. Second of all, if we're talking about a scenario where Clowney walks after 1 year, it's probably because he disappointed or had some kind of a problem where Seattle decided to not pay him, which means that maybe he's not as likely to get that big of a contract, right? In that scenario, you're already talking about Seattle deciding to get against giving him a huge contract. So maybe other teams would as well. And maybe you're talking more like the fourth round contract that Sheldon got. So this is a no-brainer trade. Like, it's absolutely, I think, if I'm John Schneider, like, I cannot, like, I don't think I've ever done anything in my life as good as what John Schneider did in this offseason between swinging Clark into Clowney and Clark and Martin into all this stuff, right? So, like, it's a fantastic trade. It's a no-brainer. But the idea that, like, well, if this goes wrong, no big deal, like, that I don't think is true. Like, there is downside to this trade, right? I don't think it's a big downside, and I don't think it's a likely downside. But yeah, we could very well be talking about the Jadeveon Clowney trade the same way we talk about the Sheldon Richardson trade, right? It could go that way.
You think it could go that badly?
It could go really badly. Like, what if Martin ends up being very good, right? Like, I think he's probably a quality starter, but what if he surprises and ends up being a very good player? And then Clowney, for whatever reason, doesn't work out, and then you go on to botch your trade pick thing or your comp pick thing, like, yeah, potentially this could be very bad. I don't think that's going to happen, right? But, like, you can end up this has Sheldon Richardson trade potential. Like, that is out there. Just because they gave a second for Sheldon and a third for Clowney doesn't mean that, like, there's not still that kind of level of downside. Which, again, I don't think is going to happen. I imagine they're going to sign Clowney, and I imagine Clowney is going to be good for them. And this is fun. This is awesome. Like, it's all good, right? Like, again, John Schneider should be incredibly I can't talk this morning. Incredibly proud of himself. But, like, let's not pretend like, who cares? It's a third round pick. Like, no, those mean something.
That I definitely agree with. Jeff, I don't see this as, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, I don't see the Sheldon Richardson downside. I mean, like, I as we said, Sheldon Richardson was going from a Jets defense where, you know, they were still trying to figure out exactly how to use him, but had some sense, to a Seahawks defense where they didn't really know how to use him. I mean, he spent half that season there trying to figure out where in the defense he was going to play. And I don't think there's any doubt about how Clowney is going to fit in. The worst case scenario is that he's rotational with Ezekiel Ansah at Leo, but I think that he's going to be a 5-tech. So I just don't see, like, that level. Like, I look at the Sheldon Richardson deal, I'm like, you didn't even know what to do with him. You traded a second, not a third. I don't see it. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah, if you have to look at the downside, I'd say we haven't touched much on, like, Clowney's durability and injury history. That's there. He has gotten injured in the past, and if he spends the year banged up and they pay the third and Martin for him and he walks, that would be a shitty scenario. So that's possible. And I think the other one is they have had trouble acclimating players from other teams in the past. They had Sheldon Richardson, they had Jimmy Graham, they had Percy Harvin. Dwayne Brown's much more simple. You go play left tackle. And they put him in that cable scheme, and he wasn't great in the cable scheme. So if they have trouble acclimating him again, that's more of a Seattle problem. But I would like to think Schneider learned the lesson from Sheldon Richardson after Nathan was the most critical of anyone I saw about them saving those comp picks up when they had all those guys coming off that year. And John Schneider didn't see it. They made those signings of Dixon and Jerron Brown, and guys who we're talking about cutting now, Mingo. That was bad. I'd like to think they've learned from that. And this offseason seemed to make it seem like they value comp picks again. So that's why I don't see the Sheldon thing happening. But the Sheldon thing was more desperate. I think this was a unique opportunity because of the Miami situation and because they had a hole at pass rusher from the Frank thing. That's where I see this a little different. I think this was more unique and an opportunity they took advantage of rather than acting from a point of desperation because of how Malik McDowell unfolded. And at least LJ Collier's coming back and they have some guys there. But yeah, there's definitely risk. There's a reason he's available.
Yeah,
there's risk in not making the move too, though, right?
Sure, of course, yeah.
I mean, if you had to get, I mean, that's where you have to look at these moves in general and say, what's the risk of them not making this move? And you betting on Ezekiel Ansah being healthy the whole year and having no one comparable to step in for him, that you're betting on Jacob Martin, because Marquise Mingo, we all agree, was going to be cut, right? Like, so he's not even part of this. that Jacob Martin was going to be able to step up and contribute. And the third round pick, I absolutely think any third round pick is high. Seahawks third round picks really quickly of late. Third round pick this year, Cody Barton. Last year, Rasheem Green. Year before, Shaquille Griffin, Delano Hill, Nazir Jones, Amara Darbo. It does change. CJ Procise, Tyler Lockett, a guy named Russell Wilson.
And if you go back to those bad ones that you rattled off, Naz, Amar Darbo, and Delano Hill, those were all comp picks. Right, comp picks. We talk about third round comp picks. They're really fourth rounds, right? They're after the third round, and so again, like you can say, oh well, if he walks, they just get a third round comp pick. Like, well, yes, maybe, but what is those are not super valuable all the time, right? I mean, it's good, it's something, but like,
if you had to bet right now, both of you, bet everything you own on it, like everything. Do you think that they're making this trade with the assumption they're going to sign Clowney, or making the trade with the assumption that they're not?
That they will.
Jeff?
Me too.
That's the plan. I think they're expecting to sign him. Now talk to me about, assuming that's the case, why do you think that they are willing to make this trade with the assumption that they're going to sign him when they weren't willing to sign Clark? I know I'm not talking about whether it was good moves independently. I'm saying they traded Clark because they did not want to pay him the money he wants. Everything we know is that Clowney wants at least that much money, if not more. Why are they willing to pay Clowney when they weren't willing to pay Clark? Jeff, you have any guesses? Nathan, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I think Jeff kind of hit it on the head. Like, I think part of this is just that it's opportunistic, right? Like, they, not to downplay like Schneider's what he did here, but like they did kind of just, I mean, the situation was there. Like, they didn't create the situation, right? They lucked into the situation a little bit, and then Schneider, like, pulled it off. So that's part of it. And then I think that that's probably also partly true with Clark. I think that they were a little opportunistic in shopping him and got a big offer from Kansas City, and they took advantage of the opportunity, right? So I think that's a combination of it. I don't think this is a team that's not going to sign defensive ends. I don't even think that, with the analytics and everything, we talk about pass blocking mattering more than pass rushing. I don't even think most analytics folks would say like never spend money on defensive ends. Like, some of these guys are worth it, right? So, and I don't think Seattle's at the point either. So I think that they just kind of felt it out and like let it come to them a little bit, and they, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. If I was guessing to answer that, first I'd say that a much better comp than Sheldon maybe for this is probably Marshawn. If you remember why they got Marshawn, how they got Marshawn, it's a very similar scenario. They drafted CJ Spiller that year. Marshawn had fallen out of favor for some things, bad attitude or laziness or not fitting in Buffalo. I think that's a better comp. They have like a 4 and a 5. That's closer to a 3 in terms of hit rate than the high second they gave up for Sheldon. But in terms of why Clark maybe and not Clowney, or why Clowney and not Clark, if you just look at the kind of guys that Pete Carroll and John Schneider like ooze over, they love that high upside, first overall, big ceiling kind of guys. Percy Harvin, even try all the 2013 shitty draft picks they've tried to resuscitate. They just love that kind of player. They always have. Those are the kind of players that they've always gone for. They love that high home run swing. And as good as Frank was, and as Frank was internally, there's just a different level of athlete as good as Frank is. And I can see them just like oozing over Clowney. Maybe not the best word, but like that's the kind of athlete that these two have gone after this entire time.
Yeah, I'm noting Ian Rappaport talking about Jacob Martin's not a household name, but just talked to a GM who gushed about his motor and how perfect fit he is for the Texans. So that's
you gotta remember that might be coming from Houston for PR.
Oh, 100%, no doubt about it.
But let's not pretend like every Seahawk fan wasn't talking about Jacob Martin a week ago. Like, our pass rush is gonna be fine. We have Ansah and Martin. Martin's this is his year. Like,
I would say the hardcore Seahawks fans. I think the average Seahawks fan would not know who Jacob Martin was.
Maybe that's true, but like a lot of the folks on Seahawks Twitter, that we interact with. But then today I've got somebody telling me, well, Martin might not have even made the 53. Like
what? That is ridiculous.
Calm down.
No. That's what I'm saying. Like I said that at the jump, and I'm not going to rain on the parade on this trade at all. I think Jacob Martin has real upside and can be a really good player in this league. And to me, that's just he was a 6th-round pick last year. So again, Schneider, we talk about that he had a real drought in the draft. His last 2 drafts are looking really good. I mean, this is part of that draft now. This absolutely is part of that draft.
Kind of generous.
Well, what? You drafted a guy in the 6th round who had enough value the next year to be a central part of this deal. I think he's certainly more central than Markevious Mingo was.
But like you don't get to like replace Jacob Martin's name on the draft list with Jadeveon Clowney now.
No, of course not. That's different. But
you're right. I mean, it's more evidence of how well Schneider is doing with all.
Do you think Jacob Martin was valued in this deal as a 6th-round pick or as higher?
Right, higher. Exactly.
Right. He was probably valued more like a 3rd-round pick in this deal.
I'm sure they liked Martin. He's a good fit for their 3-4 as an outside rusher. They don't probably think they're getting nothing, but there's just a different. One's a situational rusher and one's a all-pro level player.
Yeah. So I kind of took us sideways, but to answer my own question about why Clowney and not Clark, I think some of it's the timing for sure. And the timing, there's multiple pieces there. I think they know more about their team now than they did back when Clark wanted that deal. They did not have Bobby Wagner signed. They didn't know what they were going to do, what that was going to cost. They didn't, they had other things that were question marks. I think they can see, they didn't know if they didn't have Ansah. They didn't know what that was going to look like or that they could even get someone like him. And then I don't have proof of this at all. This is just my conjecture and reading between the lines, different conversations I've had with different folks. I think there's reason to question whether Frank Clark was going to be the same player after he got his money as he was before. And I think the Seahawks had some question about that. And Clowney, I don't know that there is the same question.
Well, there's a question about Clowney, though, right? Like, to get back to the risk on this a little bit, what you were saying and what it sounds like, I guess, from the reporting is that Houston wasn't taking Clowney back. Like, and that seems clear by what they just traded him for, right?
Yes.
So for some reason, that bridge got burned. And for all I know, it could be, I'm not saying Bill O'Brien's an angel, right? So maybe that's part of it. But like, there is some character question with Clowney.
I don't know if it's a character question. I read, sure, you could call it that. I think that's
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I read some stuff literally where they were talking about that he is that football is a professional. Yeah, he's a professional now, and he laughs and jokes too much and doesn't seem to always take things too seriously. Like that in Seattle's locker room would be everybody. Like that is just a different environment. And I also would say that if I'm the Texans, again, it gets back to, do you believe that he's a better fit in Seattle's defensive scheme than Houston's? And if you do, and I think all 3 of us do, then he's worth more to Seattle than he is to Houston. And Houston may not have wanted to sign him long-term to be a better than average pass rusher. Like he might be more than that for Seattle. So anyway, fellas, I've got to start wrapping this up because we got to get back here at 5 for another show. Any closing thoughts before we close this down?
Yeah, just quickly. We've talked about this a bunch, but I just think we've hammered John Schneider's last couple of years, and this has been such a good offseason for him. And I just think the best way to look at it is just the asset management. They turned Frank Clark into a 1st and 2nd round pick. We've talked about what they did with all those additional draft picks, that trade tree. And then with that trade, he got a similar player or a comparable, maybe a better one for a fraction of that price. That is as good as asset management as you can do. It's the opposite of the Sheldon Richardson where they blew their own comp picks by signing players they're going to cut 2 years later. This is a positive sign. And that we've talked about, Schneider's had the offseason of his life, probably the best probably since 2012. Signing Russell, signing Wagner, trading Clark, getting Clowney. What looks like a pretty good draft. They needed this because they were a team that kind of fluked into that 10-win season last year. This changes their upside, and that's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the story. Like, to kind of expand on it, I guess, a little bit. Like, Schneider had a few years there where the drafts were not good. He had the Sheldon Richardson trade. He didn't capitalize on Richard Sherman's trade market and then let him walk. Didn't capitalize on Earl Thomas's trade market and then let him walk. But now he's coming off of what looks like, I mean, at least last year's draft looks okay. Penny notwithstanding. This year's class looks, well, I mean, you can't just ignore that he threw away first round pick.
Oh, no. I'm shaking my head at that pick.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then this class looks more interesting. They trade Clark and they get a haul. They bring in Clowney and they give up, especially compared to what they got for Clark, pennies. And so, yeah, I mean, like, everything with Schneider right now is pointing up, and the management of this team looks good. There's not perfect, right? But like, I like I said, if I was John Schneider right now, I would be real proud of myself, I think.
Yeah, I think you guys said it really well. I was talking with someone recently who knows the inside of that team really well, and the players on the team really well, and feels like things are moving back. And this was before the deal completed. Feels like this team is poised to do a lot more than what people realize. And we'll get to our predictions this afternoon. So folks should definitely tune back in at 5:00. We'll go game for game, talk about whether we think we're going to win that game or lose that game. We're going to go through all the cuts. Hopefully they're all announced by then. The Seahawks do tend to take their time with those. There may be more trades. We'll talk about those. But I believe this team is in a really good position to make noise. And if I'm a Rams fan, if I'm a 49ers fan, I'm not feeling very good right now. I'm feeling a little bit more uneasy than I was a few hours ago. And you still got the best quarterback in this division and one of the best in the game. I think you arguably have the best offensive lineman in the division. You might have the best offensive line in the division. Now, you may have the best front seven in the division. And if you're starting to point towards a place where, you could win a division, you're talking about a bye. And that's when things start to get interesting in the playoffs. So I think this move, people talk about whether it's a Super Bowl move or not. I don't think about it like that. Do I think the Seahawks are 1 to 2 wins better than they were before this move? I think that's legitimately possible. So huge move, super exciting. And if nothing else, man, it's going to be fun watching him slide a Seahawks jersey on and rush, hopefully in 8 days at home. Can you imagine if they announce the defense and he is part of the starting announcement? Can you imagine what CenturyLink Field is going to do if he's part of those announcements? Even if he's not, when he walks on that field, it is going to be amazing.
He's going to be part of the announcements. He will. Like, he might not start, but he will put part of the announcements.
Yeah. So
carry that flag out and everything.
Oh man, it's going to be amazing. So I'm going to be floating the rest of the day. Maybe the rest of the weekend is going to be hard to focus on work, but man, this is great. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys this afternoon, 5:00 p.m. Pacific time. We will be back here for Real Hawk Talk. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe in your podcast apps, give us reviews, thumbs up. All those things are great. And, donate in Super Chat, become a patron, patreon.com/hawkblogger. This is the year to do it, folks. It's going to be great. So cheers to everybody. And
for the love of God, stop bugging me about comp picks in my mentions. Get out of my mentions about comp picks. I'm not talking about it anymore.
Nathan, see the light. Just be positive, and people will just listen to everything you say. It's a totally different world.
I get plenty of people listening to what I say when I'm pessimistic. It's just the mentions that are the problem.
I know. I feel your pain. I do. So you be you. All right, everybody. Cheers. Go Hawks.